The 49ers just wrapped up the owners' meetings. Jed York spoke, Kyle Shanahan spoke, John Lynch spoke. We got a good amount of information from it. We got Brandon Aiyuk talk. We got, a lot of different things ahead of the NFL draft. We're back. Haven't been here in a show in a few weeks, but me and my guy Marco, we're going to be wrapping it all up right after this. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the program. I'm your host, Rohan Chakravarthi, here with your other host, Marco Martinez. My guy, how you doing?
What's up? What's up, man? You've been a busy guy, man. Freaking covering Wisconsin basketball, getting the cover of the March Madness. That's a pretty epic way to do things, man.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's been a fun 2 weeks, but the one thing I missed was streaming, so we're back here. Got a little free time, and definitely glad to chop shop now with the 49ers, giving us a few extra nuggets at the owners' meetings and things like that. So let's get into it.
Absolutely. Where do you want to start? You want to start John Lynch, Kyle? Do you want to start Jed York? Where do you want to begin? I mean, a lot of stuff was said, a lot of things was left unsaid at the owners' meeting. So wherever you want to begin, man.
I think I want to start a little spicy to start today's show because Jed York spoke, and he spoke about, there were a lot of things. Talked about Brandon Aiyuk, talked about Brock Purdy, but Jed York spoke about, the potential impending contract for Brock Purdy. And it seems like, the 49ers are on the way to potentially paying a $40 million plus contract at quarterback. What did he take away from that? And when we're talking about the quarterback discourse, how does it reflect on the entire team in terms of their championship window, as well as on the quarterback himself?
I thought it was interesting because there was a quote I took from what he said, well, at least what Jed said. So Jed was kind of a little interesting when it came to talking because he talked about Brock, he talked about like the Brandon Aiyuk, Arik Armstead situation. But the quote I took from Jed when he was talking about Brock was Brock is going to ask for something that no one has ever asked for before, in terms of contract wise. And when he meant that, I don't know if he meant from the 49ers or if he meant in NFL in general. But I know there's other high quarterbacks being paid. So I'm pretty sure he's talking about the 49ers. I think it's interesting because he also mentioned that Super Bowls are won by dynasty or dynasty quarterbacks. He mentioned Patrick Mahomes. He mentioned Tom Brady. So he threw those two guys out there and he mentioned how Brock deservingly needs a pay raise, or obviously he's going to get paid more. But to me, it just didn't make sense because he was saying how he's okay with paying Brock, but then he said guys like Mahomes and Brady are what win you Super Bowls. So where I wish someone would have followed up with is, well, do you think Brock Purdy is on that level with Mahomes and Brady? Because if he is, then you're paying him to win those Super Bowls, and you have a valid reason to pay him and try to win Super Bowls with. But if you don't see him as that and you're overpaying him, you may really look at the 49ers in the future with all the weapons they have. And once you start paying high-end quarterbacks, for example, Josh Allen with the Buffalo Bills, right? He got paid, and this year they had to cut a lot of players. They had to restructure a lot of deals, let go of Gabe Davis, their number 2 receiver. So you're truly expecting that quarterback to carry you now. So
Yeah.
once you start losing guys like that, do they envision Brock Purdy as that guy that could carry them and win Super Bowls with for the long run? Because when you pay a quarterback, the guaranteed money is there over the 4 or 5 years that you sign them for. So there's no way you could get out of that contract. Like it's not a 3-year deal where they're out in the second year. That's not how it's going to work. So the Niners truly need to understand if he's the answer. If he's a quarterback they 100% believe they can win with. For example, if they come out this year and he struggles a little bit, I don't see them paying that much money. I truly don't.
And I mean, I think the quarterback discourse is always important. I've been one where I understand both sides of it. I mean, if you look at what Jed's saying, I think he was mainly inferring that the 49ers have never dished out a contract like that before.
So you
I know
said
they
you wanted
dished
to
out the
choose
most.
violence, and then you're like,
No,
relax.
no,
We need
no.
some energy from him. You wanted violence. Choose violence, Rohan. It's okay. It's
Yeah,
okay to
but
be mad.
I mean, he said it's a good problem when your quarterback is one of the highest paid guys on your team and in the league. I think that that's just the norm. I mean, I think your quarterback should be just because of the importance of the position. But I think when you talk about the discourse that comes with potentially paying a quarterback, I think a lot of teams are stuck in a limbo. You're right. There's the Mahomes, there's the Brady tier. But again, Brady was a different situation where he didn't necessarily, ask for as much money. And again, it's a new league. Jed brought up the situation where when they paid Garoppolo as the highest paid quarterback a few years ago, that was at 27.5 million. Now it's double that. It's skyrocketed for sure. And so I do think that this offseason there has been a bit of a window where you understand where quarterback contracts are going to go. You talk about Kirk Cousins, you talk about Baker Mayfield, kind of residing in that 40 to $45 million per year range. Again, Brock Purdy is younger, he's ascending. We'll see what happens this next year. But I think a lot of teams are in a quarterback limbo where you may not have a top five option. But again, the thing with that I've said about quarterback is if you're not paying this guy, who is your alternative? Because usually teams with good quarterbacks are drafting low in the draft. They won't have the option to potentially go up and select a top quarterback in a certain class. I'm going to specifically talk about the Dallas Cowboys. It seems very likely right now that Dak Prescott is going to hit free agency next year. The Cowboys are electing not to extend him. And right now, that move might seem questionable because if you're not extending Dak Prescott, what are you going to do at quarterback that makes your team better? Because ultimately, it is extremely hard to not only get a top quarterback option, but if you're not, if you have one, it's hard to move off of him and expect an upgrade elsewhere because of how tough it is to find the position. The Cowboys aren't going to be drafting high. They're going to be in the mid to late first round. And so it's going to be tough for them to potentially move off of Dak Prescott. And in the sense that Prescott likely moves on to get a bigger deal in free
Mhm.
agency, who are they left with? So to me, the question to me is I think it's a twofold. One, do you believe Brock Purdy is in that top five category where you're comfortable paying him? But two, if you don't, what is your alternative? Is it are you willing to punt potentially on a year where you draft a bridge or you're signing a bridge quarterback paying him maybe $10 million and you're punting on a year with the core that you currently have? Or are you going to be willing to pay the guy, understanding that there's no other option really, in the sense that you're going to do? And so that to me is the main problem with the quarterback discourse is that I think teams like the Dallas Cowboys with Dak, Miami Dolphins with Tua, even Tampa Bay with Baker Mayfield, it's like you have you're going to be forced in a way to pay this contract just because there's no other alternative, in my opinion. Which is why, to me, when I talk about Brock Purdy in the discourse, I don't even think about not paying Brock Purdy. I think about capitalizing the window when Brock Purdy is still on the rookie deal, because after that, it becomes much more difficult when you don't have 40 extra $1 million that you can spend on a yearly basis, kind of thing.
Yeah, and absolutely. When you look at the Brock Purdy situation, like they're in a tough situation because, like you said, like they don't really know what they could potentially do. But Brock has a lot of trade value, right? So, like, if you feel like you know what, I don't want to pay this quarterback, he essentially made himself a very valuable quarterback in the sense of teams want him. Essentially, like he's played really well. He looks like he could play in any scheme. So if the 49ers truly wanted to, if they don't think he's the answer, where you're gonna if Brock comes in and he's asking for 60 million, right? 55 is the highest annual per year. And that's with Joe Burrow. After that, it's 52 with Justin Herbert. So if he comes in asking for 50 to 60 million, I think you can't really pay that because looking at things, those teams have became depleted. Justin Herbert, his contract essentially made the Chargers get rid of everyone on their team. They had to restructure their two defensive ends. Lamar Jackson, they can't really bring in any receivers for him. They can't bring weapons for him. Their defense has to be consistently stacked because the offense doesn't have the weapons, and they expect Lamar to carry the load. Um, Jalen Hurts is the fourth highest at 51 million. So we could argue that Brock is better than them. Um, But the thing is it's not about whether he's better than them. It's about the value at the position, right? Like for example, looking at quarterback value. So Dak Prescott getting paid 40 million this year. Jared Goff, 33 and a half. Baker Mayfield, 33. Jordan Love, 13 million. So it's like you could
Mhm.
essentially bargain. Because after that, it becomes a lot of rookies and veterans. But you have to know that your quarterback is the answer and he is the future of your franchise. Because if you invest all in on him, you're losing guys eventually like George Kittle. You're losing guys like obviously George Kittle even up there in age. He might even retire within the next 5 years of his contract. Potentially the guys that you're drafting within the next year or two, you might not be able to re-sign them because of the Brock contract. So a lot of it comes into, can Brock carry his own team? And we don't know that because he has a stacked roster, and we'll never know until after they pay him. Just like we didn't know with Josh Allen. In terms of Josh Allen has always had a good defense. He's had Stephon
Right.
Diggs. He's had good tight ends, but now he has to carry that load, and he has to carry his team. We knew Patrick Mahomes could. Shit, he did it without receivers last year, and he won his damn Super Bowl with an elite defense. So it's all about how they value Brock, right? And I think at the end of the day, you have to value him because he is your franchise quarterback. But if you could trade him next offseason, if he doesn't win a Super Bowl or he struggles a little bit, and you could trade him and you could get a quarterback in the first round, I think you kind of have to look at it in terms of keeping your window alive. Because the reality is when you start paying quarterbacks, unless you're elite, you're not going to win a Super Bowl with them, and it's been true.
That's fair. The one thing I will say is doing that is a fireable offense if it doesn't work out. And when you look at the team and the way that they've evaluated quarterbacks so far, I don't have full confidence in the team to evaluate another quarterback. They got their starting quarterback right now came to them, and they've said it literally straight up. It came out of sheer luck. You got Brock Purdy out of sheer luck. And so essentially, if you are, let's say you trade Brock Purdy for maybe a top 5 pick, maybe a top 10 pick in the draft, and you select a quarterback, it's again, it's similar to the problem you had in 2021, except it's more accelerated in the sense that this guy, whoever you get, has to be ready to go immediately. Because when you talk about the window, you can't necessarily take a year off of the window. You need to make sure that window is capitalized in the 1 to 2 to 3 years that you have. And so, to me, for that, that's why if you're looking to potentially go for a younger option in the sense that you hope that you can, maximize cap savings in that sense, I think it becomes a little more difficult. The one thing I will say is when you talk about a comment like this, won't they make his deal backloaded? Yes, they will. However, it also just heightens the importance that you have to make sure that you pull it off in the very early years. Otherwise, you're going to face a situation. For example, I'll go back to the Dallas Cowboys and Dak Prescott. The Dallas Cowboys have not done a single thing this offseason. Why? Because when you have a backloaded contract and the quarterback is unwilling to move off of, or make a restructure, or the team is unwilling to make a restructure to hurt themselves in the future, you're going to have a year where it's a significant cap hit that you have to absorb. And Prescott was smart to have no tag, no trade clauses in this deal. And so you're going to have a year where it's like this, where you have $59 million or so tied into a quarterback and or
55 in
whatever it
cap
might.
and then 69 dead cap.
Yeah, 59 million in cap. And so, you're tied into that quarterback deal. And so that's the one thing about backloaded deals. It heightens the importance that you have to capitalize on the early years because
Rohan, can you
otherwise, go ahead.
after you talk about the Prescott, I want you to address this comment and why you don't trust the team to evaluate QBs.
Yeah, yeah. But overall, I think when you talk about a quarterback like Prescott, right, you need to make sure you capitalize on the early years, and I think that also is similar where you have intense scrutiny to make sure you do what you got to do in that year. The one thing I also will say about Dak Prescott, he has a 55 or whatever $1 million cap hit this year. You're going to have a void charge because with these backloaded contracts, you also restructure it likely once or twice. Prescott's dead cap hit next year is $40 million, I believe. And so
Mhm.
the Dallas Cowboys are going to have to, it's not a 1 year problem because the Cowboys aren't going to contend this year, at least not to the capacity that they want to. They probably can't either next year. And the worst part is they don't even have a solution that takes away, that 40 million is covering. And so that's kind of the thing about that. As for not trusting the team's ability to evaluate quarterbacks, that's been my biggest gripe with Kyle Shanahan throughout his entire tenure with the 49ers, because they have misevaluated the position at every avenue that has costed the team a Super Bowl. You talk about the beginning. The first decision they made at quarterback was to trade for Jimmy Garoppolo, despite wanting Kirk Cousins in free agency when you could have gotten Kirk for free, a better quarterback for free. They traded a second round pick, and then they paid him after 5 games the biggest contract in NFL history for a quarterback. So, it's the misevaluation that happened. Then you go to, obviously, when they were looking to select a quarterback. Not only did they miss out on trades for guys like Matthew Stafford, not sign players that they wanted to in free agency that period, miss out on Tom Brady that one year when Brady ultimately wins the Super Bowl the next
No,
year.
they didn't miss
Then,
out on him. They turned Brady down.
sorry, they turned down on Tom Brady. They turned Tom Brady down. It's just that you had a lot of options, and the Niners ultimately, when you look at it, are looking back, hoping that one of those options ultimately worked out. Because not only did they turned Brady down, who won a Super Bowl with the Buccaneers. They had Stafford in the bag, missed out on that trade. Stafford wins the Super Bowl with the Los Angeles Rams. It's a lot of these decisions where that causes me to misevaluate. That causes me to have less faith in their ability to evaluate the position. And again, it's not just one person necessarily that is in the process, it's the entire collective. But when you're consistently having issues with the quarterback position to the point where your best option in 7 years was the guy you completely lucked into with a seventh round pick, to me, that's a problem.
Absolutely, and they've been on record stating that they got lucky with Brock, and if it wasn't for Brian Greasy, Brock wouldn't be here. That is essentially how I look at it. If it wasn't for Kyle hiring Brian Greasy, he's not here. So going into things, we then heard. Do you want to talk about Jed York talking about how he doesn't care to win Super Bowls, or was that just
Yeah,
me
we can.
overreacting?
Yeah, we can.
So Jed York essentially was like, well, Grant asked him, Grant Conn, make sure you guys are following him as well. But Grant went on and he asked him, he was, hey, 10 years ago, you said your goal was to win championships, Super Bowls, and that's the only way you could be satisfied is if you won Super Bowls. Well, he then stated this season and this year that he didn't view this season as a disappointment, that he viewed it as a successful season, even though the Niners got to the Super Bowl and they didn't win a championship. And Jed York essentially said, well, every season you have to view it as you have to look at it outside of just a Super Bowl. You don't look at it as a failure because you made it there and lost. You got to look at it as a successful season because your team got there and is good enough to get there, keep competing. At what point does Jed York start holding people accountable 4 years in a row, getting to championships, getting to Super Bowls, and not showing for it? Like, essentially, what Jed York is telling us is, you know what? I'm content with filling up my seats in the stands. I'm content with getting to the championship and getting to the Super Bowl, but I don't really care if we don't win it. Like, to me, I thought that was the most bizarre way to look at it because every owner, I get it. You could have a successful season by making the playoffs and doing things like, yeah, it's a success. Yes, your team won more games and then they lost, but you didn't. At the end of the day, there's one real winner, and that's the Super Bowl winner. That was the Kansas City Chiefs this year. I thought that comment from Jed York was bizarre. I truly don't understand how Jed York, as an owner, could sit there and tell the fan base, I'm okay with just getting to the championship or getting to the Super Bowl. One day we'll get there. One day we'll get there. Like, that to me blew my freaking mind. I'm just curious, Rohan, what are your thoughts on Jed York only saying getting to the championship and getting to the Super Bowl is good enough? Hey, participation awards, we're all for them.
I think this was interesting. I mean, Jed York's entire interview was kind of interesting. But to me, the way that I looked at it is he was trying to prove that he's kind of matured as a person to not be over emotional after a big loss like this. He was trying to prove that he can be the leader and kind of regroup the team after a thing like this. Because he was talking about how, after the what do you call it? After like the first Super Bowl. he thought his life was going to end. And then the Baltimore one back in 2012, he thought that that one was extremely gut wrenching and things like that. And then he talked about, I believe he said he wanted to, like, he punched a wall or nearly broke his wrist after Jimmy got tore his ACL or something like that. And I think the point of what he was saying is, like, he's trying not to be over emotional and try to be the optimist when things like this happen. But I think he said, I think you can't be ashamed of a successful season when talking about this year. And our goal is always going to be win Super Bowls. And and then he talked about something like, if you win a Super Bowl, the job is still not done. You're looking to win a Super Bowl the next year or something like that. But I think to me, it's complacency. And it's interesting. I won't over criticize it because it comes from the owner. If you hear this from somebody in the organization necessarily, I think that that's a problem. But to me, the owner, it's more of an owner mindset rather than a winning mindset. In that, one, we're successful. The business is clearly booming. And two, we've seen York be complacent in years past. I'm one of the biggest Kyle Shanahan guys, out there. I think Kyle Shanahan is a top head coach, and I've said on record I would not have extended him before last season. I thought that ultimately Kyle Shanahan had to showcase that he could help this or lead this team to a Super Bowl under his current contract, which extended to, or his old contract, which extended till 2026. That should have been, the benchmark. And then after that, you reevaluate and you see things. York, though, before any of the scrutiny could potentially happen, extended him last offseason. And so they're there, they're tied in for the foreseeable future. In a way, it's not that I'm not saying Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch are, the epitome of complacency or anything like that, but you aren't necessarily setting a standard. You're okay with what's going on right now, and that's a question mark. But I also think this kind of thing can reek throughout the entire organization, where you see players consistently talking, trying to snap back at people. You see, things like this, but you also do see that the loss clearly hurts them and things
But
like that. But yeah,
what
it's a little interesting.
what about him coming out though, Rohan? Because right, he came out before the Super Bowl and he went on a victory lap, right? How Brock was his great quarterback and how we're gonna win a Super Bowl and how he's so excited that the Niners are in a Super Bowl. And he took a victory lap, right? Before the Super Bowl, he took a victory lap, talking about how Kyle Shanahan knew by like the third day in camp that year that he had to do to win a Super Bowl, and he came out and went on this rant when normally you don't see owners. Normally you see owners kind of chill back like and don't talk, and that's what Jed has been trying to do. But he was so excited to get to the Super Bowl that he went on and spoke with. Remember, he showed up without even having a media day like announcement. He just showed up like to speak, and that was when he went on like this long tangent on how the Niners are such a great organization and how they're here to win Super Bowls and how Brock Purdy is the future of this franchise. And then they don't win a Super Bowl, and now he's back to I learned about myself and I self-evaluated, and I'm looking at it, and as long as we have successful seasons and their seats in the seats are filled, and that's how I took it. Is okay, you're excited that the seats are filled. You're not really too excited about the 49ers winning championships. And I get that obviously as an owner, you want to win a championship. But the way I took it is there's not going to be no pressure on John Lynch or Kyle Shanahan for the next couple of years. As long as they're making the playoffs and their team looks solid, there's no pressure on them to win a Super Bowl. And
Mhm.
like you said, that extension came early. It was an early extension from John Lynch because the Niners were successful, or at least winning football games. But I definitely felt like Jed York dropped the ball. Um, Championship should be the ultimate goal, and that should be the only standard here. He took shot at his uncle Eddie DeBartolo. Um, I thought that was crazy. Like, how do you? Well, my uncle only won because he had money to pay for everyone, and there was no cap space. That makes no sense because you truly could, if you really wanted to, Jed, you could fork out some money and create more cap space. It would create in the next year or two. It would create more cap space if you pay people up front, like some other organizations have done. Example, Exhibit A, the Cleveland Browns, the New Orleans Saints. You could go and sign big name players and keep creating extra cap space. Now it's going to give you a little situation in a year or two, but you could put that money up front and win a championship and do what your uncle Eddie did. Just because the cap space is a thing doesn't mean you can't make it work, you just gotta pocket cash up front to these players by like restructuring and doing other things, not necessarily the restructures to backload and push void years onto players. So to me, I didn't understand where he was coming from with that. It didn't sit well with me because as a fan base, as a young fan growing up, my mindset from the 49ers was we were five-time champions. We're known as one of the greatest organizations because we win championships, and championships is the expectation here. And then he goes on and says, "Nah, my expectations are successful seasons. Whatever I feel successful is good enough." Like that's bullshit to me, to be honest with you.
To me, yeah, I definitely understand it. To me, though, personally, I've never really cared, except for one, Jerry Jones. I've never really cared what an owner has to say. Maybe that's just me, but I don't really care about the owner portion of it. And I'm not saying this to excuse Jed York. Like I said, I think his mentality is a little complacent. But I mean, I don't know. I feel like owners kind of fluff things up. I don't really take too much of what they have with substance. And so to me, it is about results, especially with the 49ers and the way that they have. The Niners themselves have said, you a lot of players have said it's Super Bowl or bust. They understand. It's just you got to start, things have got to start to pick up, and the window ultimately will be closing with this specific core.
But if your owner, so I disagree with that though, because I agree with you in the sense of some of these owners they say shit just to say shit. Same thing with Jerry. No one really cares what Jerry Jones has to say or what he does because he's technically the GM, so he has more power than most owners. But the thing is when it comes from your owner saying this, it holds a little bit more weight because it's from the very top. Now, if the culture is to have successful seasons and that's what you're telling your franchise and that's what your head coach and general manager are okay with,
Uh-huh.
then it's a big reason. Like, so saying that, like, no matter what he should have said, championships are the culture here. Like, that's the expectation here, year in, year out. Saying you had a successful season and you're okay with losing in the Super Bowl, to be honest, is weird because now John and Kyle knows, all right, technically we don't have to win a Super Bowl and our jobs are okay. I just think it's weird. I don't know. I just personally thought Jed York was weird for that.
No, I feel you. I feel you.
We also
Con-
have go ahead.
No, I saw a comment earlier. Steve Wyche's interview, I think it was like a few minute interview with Kyle Shanahan. Did you get to catch that? And if so, what were your kind of thoughts on it? I think it was the main takeaway that I got was like his pure confidence in Brock. But what did you kind of think about it?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool to hear him speak about Brock. So he was very um like put confidence behind Brock, but not only that, he was just talking about how him having a full offseason is going to be super big with him, and he's pumped to be his head coach, and he's pumped to move forward with him. He talked about how he got married and how that should be a much bigger thing with him moving forward. He should have more confidence and have more energy and more. Honestly, what he said is what every coach should talk about their quarterback, though. Like again, when we talk about stuff like this, it's one I loved seeing Kyle, and it wasn't the what he said, it was the way it came off, and it was more so the body language when he
Genuine.
was saying it.
Yeah.
It's like it was
Yeah.
his body language was truly excited. Like you could see the energy coming through him. And I thought that was the best part is like Kyle finally is confident in a quarterback. He finally has his quarterback. But guess what? Like I said last year, he called Brock the real deal. Jed York said stuff. I said if you're gonna call a quarterback in his second year the real deal and that there was no excuses last year. You had the quarterback last year. So this year, now that okay, benefit of the doubt, he didn't have an offseason. I'll give him that. This year you have the quarterback. So if you don't win, what's the reason?
Yeah. No, I feel you. I feel you on that. And I think, again, um, it's cool to see him, being confident with his quarterback. Again, I think it emphasizes the current window. Got to be able to win a Super Bowl sooner than later. And I think, this year is your best shot with this current core because I think things start to probably change this next offseason. We already saw things start to change with Ark Armstead, and him being released, but things probably start to change even more at a higher magnitude next offseason. So we'll definitely look at it. But I want to talk, about this specific year, the Super Bowl window, what the Niners did this offseason. T- Tell me about some of the moves, your thoughts on some of the moves. Guys like Yadam, guys like, the moves that they made. What do you think about them? Do you think they've done enough? And do you think that they should do a little more before the NFL draft?
I think they went out and got depth, and I think that was an issue when you look at the roster. And you and I had said it. We had spoke with, I believe, Sunil on the show before the season. We had spoke about how signing. Well, at least myself, I think you agreed with me. But I had talked about how the depth in the inside on defense, on the defensive line in general, was an issue. We talked about how the O line was an issue, the depth wise there was an issue, and essentially, it's looking at the Niners roster, they do have depth issues, and people don't realize or based off of what everything's going, it's one of those ones where I'm worried about the Niners, but I'm not because they went out and did what they needed to do. They needed to add depth, and that's the biggest thing is adding depth to this roster was the biggest issue last year. But the thing is, though, is in my opinion, I don't think the D line was the biggest reason the Niners lost in the Super Bowl. I thought the D line played a phenomenal job in this, did a phenomenal job in the Super Bowl. I thought it was more so the O line who didn't play great, but also the O line wasn't the biggest issue. I thought it was more so the coach crumbled, and we're being straight up. The coach crumbled, and you needed your quarterback who we're considering a franchise quarterback, and we expect to pay him $50 million this year or the next offseason. So if you expect that guy should have stepped up and had a great game. Like you needed Brock to have a great game to win, right? So I don't think addressing the D line or going out and signing aging veteran linebackers when you have two young rookies you just drafted last year was the way to go. Okay, you signed Isaac Yiadom, a corner who's expected to compete for that starting job opposite of Travarius Ward. But when you look at it, he's had one good year. You're okay, cool. You're bringing in a guy who's a journeyman who's had one good year. Um, so for me, I don't know how. I think they got better, right? I looking at everything, they got better depth wise. Their team's going to be really good. They didn't lose out on extreme players or extreme production from the defensive line or the offense. Everyone's coming back on the offense, so it's just a matter about having the depth. But I think there was bigger glaring issues that aren't being talked about, right? Like when you're going up against Mahomes, your quarterback has to go toe for toe, toe to toe with him and win that game. He played average. He played a good game. You didn't need that in a Super Bowl. You need your quarterback to play great, and I think that was the bigger issue. So free agency, I thought in this situation, if we saw the issue was O line, and the reason why Brock didn't play great was because of the O line. Why didn't we go address the O line? And you don't have to go play 20 million for an offensive lineman. For example, Tyler Biotis, a center, who I think starts day one on the Niners if he's on the team and Brunsel's on the team or Brendel's on the team. Sorry, starts day one. He got paid 10 million. I think his cap hit is 5 million. So it's like there's offseason signings from other teams and not necessarily the big free agent signings that I felt like the Niners could have been in on, but they weren't. So to me, that's where I'm like, why didn't you do that instead of this? So I guess now it's the waiting game and seeing how they address the draft. Do they go heavy O line and a deep offensive line class? And if they do, could that be a right away year one replacement for these guys? Because it surely wasn't the O line surely wasn't good enough to beat teams that had good defensive lines and teams that blitzed you. For example, the Cleveland Browns, good D line, good defense. They like to blitz. The Ravens blitzed heavy against the Niners with a good defense. The Chiefs, they all did the same thing. And how did Purdy play against them? He didn't play great, played average against them, but they lost every single one of those games, and it's not because of 100% Brock Purdy's fault. It's his O line wasn't good enough, and they failed him in a way. And I think that's should have been the bigger issue the 49ers should have looked at, not necessarily stacking up on two defensive ends, a linebacker who, which is weird, Devondre Campbell, and I know I'm going on speaking a lot, but Devondre Campbell, right? John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan said they speak highly of him. They look at him so high. If they looked at him so high, why did Kyle attack him every time they played the Packers? Makes no sense. But that's where I'm at. I think it's more so they addressed the wrong spots in the offseason. But again, they still have a draft to do, so they could address the O-line in the draft. So that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I feel you. And to me, here's what I think about free agency. I told you going into free agency, my number one thing was adding one offensive lineman. I specifically highlighted center, especially, I was looking center, right guard, or, center and guard. Specifically, though, the week before I highlighted center, I thought there was an ample amount of centers in this free agency period that would have improved the 49ers
Mhm.
roster. I thought that was the most important part because it seemed like they were set on bringing back John Feliciano at right guard. Sure, if you believe in his veteran presence, he's a guy who's been durable. If you believe he can, at least be better than what you had with Burford last year, all right. Because right tackle, it seemed like you're improving in the draft. Didn't think you'd go for a tackle, but I thought you should have gone for a center. Niners had the opportunity, ultimately went elsewhere. I like the idea of adding depth primarily from a salary cap standpoint. One, it provides you more flexibility, whereas if you tie $20 million a year into one player, aka Javon Hargrave from last year, it makes it harder for you to move off of that contract. You have to eat a higher dead cap it and things like that. Depth, maybe not having the same impact as one specific player, but with the way the Niners utilize their rotation at defensive line, adds in more bodies. I think that it makes sense. At least Leonard Floyd signing with his durability, I think it makes sense. I think that add some depth to the piece. Devondre Campbell, not great. I think they paid him a good amount though. They paid him $5 million.
But you know why they overpaid him though, right?
Go ahead.
Because they lost Eric
So they
Kendrick.
lost on Kendricks. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But
so
I
they
mean,
had to overpay.
$5 million for Devondre Campbell, I'm not that high on. I'm not that high on. And so to me, that's whatever. Yadam, I think the Yadam was a solid move and pretty cheap, so that was all right. I think the majority of their moves were all right. To me, the big thing was the miss offensive line at center. I thought center you should have definitely. Ooh, don't like that. Please don't like that right now. No
Wait,
thanks.
hold on. Let's address this though, because here's a couple of comments I wanted to get to actually. But
Go
seeing
ahead.
two guys who have never really played compete at center, how does that make your team really better? Zakel hasn't been good enough to be the center. He's
Also,
been
that's an
trying to get run
indictment
there.
right now on the way your center position is. If you're trusting these two guys, Ben Barch, there's a reason he's been, he's gone around a couple of teams now. He's not that good. He's not great. He is your worst offensive lineman probably on the team, at least at this moment. Zakel, we've seen him at center, and I thought he'd at least have a chance to compete, but unfortunately, it just doesn't seem like first of all, he's not strong enough. It seems, despite being around 315 pounds, he struggles with his anchor. He struggles in pass protection, and with the athleticism, that's the main draw with him. In the limited reps, it's not been great, right? Overall, in terms of his overall profile, and so don't really believe in this too much. But more importantly, I thought the 49ers should have just made one move at offensive line. I think they still can. I still think they can, but we'll see what they do in the draft. I think that right now, do they get better? I think that they've gotten better in certain areas. The question I have for you, though, and this is something that I've seen a lot on Twitter and on other areas. Do you believe the 49ers defensive line is better this year or better last year?
So you lose. This is a great question. You lose Armstead, right? And I think Armstead was very underrated. People didn't realize how good he was. You lose Javon Kinlaw, and I thought Javon Kinlaw was really good last year. His 1 year he had in a contract year. Depth wise, edge rusher is better. I think Leonard Floyd is better. So your pass rush is going to be better, but your interior defensive line in the run game, I don't know. Malik Collins isn't as great of a run defender. He's more of a pass rusher. But they also brought in Jordan Elliott, who's a more of a run defender. Um, so depth wise, I would say the Niners defensive line is better. Starting wise, run defense got worse in my opinion. Um, Losing Armstead is going to make your run defense worse. So depending on who they start, is it Jordan Elliott? Is it Malik Collins? Because if it's Malik Collins, I think Malik Collins he's as good of a run defender as he is pass rusher. He's not a good
Yeah.
and not as good of a run defender as Armstead. Either is Jordan Elliott. I think that's thing that scares me is the Niners' run defense is going to get worse. And if your run defense gets worse, that means your pass defense is going to get worse because now you're more sustainable to the play action. Um, so for me, I think that's the biggest thing. I think realistically, I think they got worse. But pass rushing, they're going
Yeah.
to get better because Leonard Floyd. But what's your thoughts on it? He
I
said,
honestly, I do think they got worse. Losing Armstead with a chronic foot issue, I understand. That's the big thing with Armstead. It's not he's underrated, but he's been injured. To me though, I don't know if they got better overall. And the reason is I think they got better, what do you call it? Better on the end. I think it's comparable to better. Chase Young wasn't as bad as people said. I don't think he was as bad as people said. I think Leonard Floyd is solid. Leonard Floyd also did have a drop off the last 7 games or so of the season, but he's durable. Gross Matos is developmental. I don't know exactly the impact that he'll have. I think they prefer the versatility where you might be able to slide him inside. You'll see you develop. Give him the benefit of the doubt working with Kosarek. At defensive tackle, though, Armstead was a good piece. And despite his injuries, he also played through his injuries a significant amount. And so I understand the injury point and I understand the durability point. I think that that's true. But I do think the Niners got worse because when you look at Armstead, the reason they signed Javon Hargrave is because they thought he'd complement Armstead well. They thought that run defense would have been it would have been all right if you had Armstead in the middle to plug the gap. And so when you add in Malik Collins, who I think is a good pass rusher, I am a big fan. I thought that was the best move the Niners made all offseason. You add in Jordan Elliott, who's a solid run defender. However, with a rotation, there are ways to exploit a rotation in the sense that you understand the personnel that's on the field. Teams might throw out of 21 personnel with Jordan Elliott on the field. Teams also might look to run the ball, with Malik Collins on the field. I think it's easier to disguise a pass rusher than it is to disguise a true run defender. And so there's that. But I do think that the team slightly got worse. Maybe it's comparable. Maybe it's comparable given the durability concerns as well. But I think the team slightly got worse at defensive line. I do think the team slightly got worse, probably because of the impact that Armstead provides. You also had solid enough with Kinlaw, who's probably going to Jordan Elliott probably fills the Kinlaw role. Malik Collins probably fills the Armstead role in the sense of impact. So I think that that's there, but I think they slightly got worse.
yeah, absolutely. And shout out to 49ers throwback. So for me, I like both guys from LSU, Mason Smith and Mekhi Wingo. If we're looking at a guy later in
Okay,
the
nice.
draft, a guy like Tyler Davis who didn't test too great, but he's a good run defender. Um, but besides that, like this draft class is more so I would say Chris Jenkins. I really like him from Michigan if he's there in the second round. I do like Rook or Horo. I don't know how to say his last name. I don't know why. Like it's a harder last name to say. I think he's going to be a phenomenal player in the NFL from Clemson. So there's a lot of guys in the draft you could take. So Aurora is a guy who has extreme upside. Jenkins' upside isn't as high, but his floor's I think a little bit higher right now.
Hmm.
So it all just depends on where you decide to go. I think the Niners definitely have an issue on the run defense, like you said, but also we heard the Niners wanting to potentially extend Brandon Aiyuk earlier, than sooner rather than later, right? That's what they kept saying. What are your thoughts on John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan keep mentioning sooner rather than later? And what are your thoughts on the 49ers general manager shutting down any trade rumors right away as soon as he was asked?
Yeah, trade rumors. I mean, it makes sense. Again, we've seen little glimpses of what Ayuk has been putting out on Twitter, on wherever, the little subtle cryptic messages. But ultimately, I think we've spoke about this before. If we're talking about leverage, Brandon Ayuk has zero leverage in this. The way that you create leverage is via social media, potentially requesting a trade. Ayuk hasn't gone that far yet, but that's the way you create leverage because Ayuk has zero leverage right here. He has a fifth-year option, which is something that Deebo Samuel did not have. So the Niners have an extra year of team control. Not only that, you could tag him for at least 2 more years. So truly, if the Niners wanted, they have at least 3 more years of team control in the worst case scenario. But ultimately, we know this has been something the Niners have been steadfast on. Their commitment to Brandon Ayuk, and despite all of the rumors, I ultimately don't believe they'll trade Brandon Ayuk. In terms of salary wise, could they fit Brandon Ayuk with low cap hits in the first 2 years of his deal? Yes. Why? Because not only does Ayuk, you can make Ayuk have an extension. Let's say Ayuk only wants to get on the market as soon as possible, 3-year extension. That's a 4-year deal total with the 5th-year option because the 5th-year option is already tied in
Mhm.
to the contract. So that helps the 49ers out in terms of structuring things, in terms of lowering things on the front end and things like that. So I do think the Niners have flexibility here with this deal. I think they want to get it done. The question is, does Ayuk want to get it done sooner than later? I think that's the biggest question because I think, in my opinion, it's in the Niners' best interest for the deal to get done as soon as possible, and it's in Brandon Ayuk's best interest to get to wait. It's in his best interest to wait because of the amount of deals still yet to come in the wide receiver market. There are a number of names that are still awaiting extensions. You still look at, the T. Higgins, you even his teammate, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, who might be 1 year away still, but you look at those guys, that 2020 class is pretty stacked. They still got some receivers where you might expect extensions, sooner than later. CD Lamb is a guy who you might expect an extension from sooner than later. There are names still out there that Brandon Ayuk could say, we'll wait for their deal, and then after their deal skyrockets, we can capitalize on that and get some more money. So it ultimately
Yeah.
depends on kind of which side folds for sooner than later, because that's the way these negotiations go. They're back and forth. So I wouldn't put too much blame on the 49ers organization for them not getting the deal done earlier, just as I haven't in years past, because it's a two-way street. And I'm not going to put blame on Ayuk because you want him to get the best bag possible. At least he wants to get the best bag possible, and that's the way it's going to be done.
And what's crazy is with T. Higgins, Brandon Ayuk has more yards and touchdowns than T. Higgins. So you definitely wait for a guy like T. Higgins to go. Now, I don't see him getting CD Lamb money. I don't see him getting Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase money. But definitely you got to wait for some of those other guys to sign. You want to try to be one of the last ones to sign. A couple of the comments. So for me, looking at Brandon Ayuk, I don't see him getting traded. I think he's going to be on the Niners. One, you don't make him play on his 5th-year option. You didn't make any other guys wait to get paid, or you didn't make them do any of that. So why are you going to treat Brandon Ayuk in any other way? Um, Kittle, they paid him in his 4th year. Warner paid him. Deebo paid him. Why does Ayuk automatically get to play on that 5th year? He doesn't owe the Niners nothing just because they drafted him in the 1st round. He don't owe them nothing. Just like the Niners don't owe Ayuk anything. So for me, Ayuk, a deal was going to get dirty. That's why. What? Ayuk, a deal is going to get dirty. That's why. Type that again and then resend it because I'm confused on that one. But looking at that, the 49ers with Ayuk, right? I know Invader said that Ayuk never took over a game when he was out. You can't really have a receiver take over a game when they're not getting targets. But looking at Brandon Ayuk, he's had 150 yards off on 6 targets. He's had 156 yards on 6 targets. So it's like, what do you consider taking over a game? Because some of these receivers who take over games get 10 plus targets and barely have 150 yards. So you can't really take over a game if you're not getting those targets. And for me, I think Brandon Ayuk deserves more targets. I think he deserves to get paid. I think the Niners would be dumb to get rid of their best man-to-man receiver, their best receiver overall in general. And it doesn't make sense because I know a lot of people keep saying, "Oh, well, Brandon Ayuk and Deebo, they both can't get paid." That's a false statement because year one of that deal, right? Of Ayuk getting extended, his cap hit's going to drop from 14 to um, around 5, I believe. So they saved 10 million on that contract, right? Year one, which would be this year,
Mhm.
in cap space. So you're having a receiver who's costing 5 million and another who's costing 25. You're okay to do that, or 28. You're okay to do that. It's when next year's when the money gets big, when you have an out on Deebo's contract and you could trade him or you could get rid of him for the cheap. So for me, it doesn't make sense when people say that. I think he's on the roster. I don't see any scenario where he's not on the roster. He said, Ayuk's deal don't think is going to be a smooth transaction. No contract is ever a smooth transaction. Like, look at when Deebo Samuel got extended. People forget he unfollowed the Niners, requested a trade publicly. Um, he told he told the team trade me, and they ended up working something out. Kittle's deal that didn't go well.
Yeah.
There was a bit. Who remembers hashtag pay Kittle? It didn't go well. It wasn't the reason why that hashtag started. I believe was his family members. It started because of that. Like, it's so no contract ever goes well with any team. Ayuk top 12 receiver on my end. I know we just did a receiver ranking. Um, how would you? Because I know a lot of people keep mentioning this. I want to ask you, Rohan, how do you replace Ayuk in this draft class with the receiver at pick 31?
I think it's tough, not necessarily in the sense that I don't think he can be replaced by a receiver. I think this receiver class is good. However, we've seen this argument once before. I mean, when you traded DeForest Buckner, what did the Niners do? They ultimately pegged in defensive tackle at 14. They overlooked best player available. They had a tackle on the board that could have very well helped them in Tristan Wirfs. Instead, trading down one pick, allowing the Buccaneers to pick Tristan Wirfs, you had receivers, at your arsenal. CeeDee Lamb was in the mix. And I'm not saying that CeeDee Lamb would have been a better pick than what the Niners did with Brandon Aiyuk, but you had different options, but the Niners pegged in defensive tackle at 14, took Javon Kinlaw despite the red flags with his injury issues, and ultimately that pick didn't pan out. I think the issue is when you trade Brandon Aiyuk, you might peg yourself into taking a receiver, might take it too early, or might overlook best player available, which in this class could be an offensive tackle at 31. And I think that's the main issue. However, if you were looking at receivers in that first round range at the end who could be available that the Niners would be, willing to take, I'm looking at guys like Adonai Mitchell. Adonai Mitchell out of Texas, I think he would be a solid fit should he fall to 31. Will he fall? I don't know. I think there are a lot of receiver needy teams within the top 30, and I think that there are a lot of teams that would prefer Adonai Mitchell. Wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't go past the Texans over there at 23. I think that might be a realistic spot where he might, that
He's
might
going
be
to the
like
Colts. If he's there when the Colts pick, I would expect the Colts to take him.
over Thomas.
Yeah, only
Okay.
because they like his route running ability, and he has the speed as well, and he is essentially like Thomas, but a better route
Mhm.
runner. He's a more
Yeah.
polished route runner right now.
Got it. I think this is the right way, and this is the way that I've kind of been hinting at the entire offseason. Now, at the combine, I'm going to bring this up because I want to clarify. I never advocated for the Niners to trade Deebo Samuel. I did not
Yeah, you
say
did.
that Deebo Samuel trade was going to happen this offseason. All I'm saying, and it was, you've heard glimpses since then. The 49ers were entertaining the idea of trading Deebo Samuel, is what people like myself heard at the combine. Not that they will do it, not that they won't, not that they absolutely are going to do it either before the draft or after the draft, but they were entertaining the idea, which likely, if that conversation were to come, would happen closer to June 1st, because it would be a post June 1st trade. And so that would be the idea. But that aside, the main problem, or the main thing about that is you're looking towards the future at receiver. Deebo Samuel likely isn't on this team next year, when the 49ers have to make some tough decisions at receiver should they extend Brandon Aiyuk. With that said, you want to likely have his replacement already in place, given the way that the Niners receivers sometimes take a little bit longer to acclimate. We've seen, Brandon Ayuk's little doghouse period and all of that. So I think it would be smart to prepare for that. You draft a receiver in the first 3 rounds of this draft, especially in a strong receiver class where you might get a top option that could fill a wide receiver 2 need in the first 3 rounds. You prepare him in the wings. He might be your receiver 4 or 5 this year, but next year, with guys like Deebo Samuel potentially gone, I don't think George Kittle is gone, but maybe Jawan Jennings chooses to find a bigger deal in unrestricted free agency. You have a bigger need for a receiver. You have a guy who has a year of seasoning, and you can implement, him into your game plan. I think that would be a logical solution for the 49ers, where they are looking ahead for the future by drafting a receiver, potentially one with return capabilities as well. But I think you look to address your receiver depth after losing a Ray McLeod, by obviously going to the draft.
UCF kid Javon Baker's going before the 4th round. Good receiver. But again, if you're replacing Brandon Aiyuk with the player going like you think's going to go in the 4th round, or you want them to take in the 4th round, how does that make your team better? How does it keep them in the running to win a Super Bowl? He's a good now. Javon Baker is a good, very, very good route runner. Contested catch, has good catch radius. He could track the deep ball, but he lacks vertical speed, and he lacks the consistency to beat man coverage. Again, now you're having two guys. If you now again you would trade Aiyuk for Latham. Now what you're pretty much doing is having no receivers that could truly beat man coverage on your roster. I want to see how that goes when teams go man across the board like the Chiefs did, right? And Kyle decided to run a lot of man beaters for Deebo Samuel. How did that work? You're muted. But that didn't work well. Again, not having Aiyuk isn't gonna keep them from making the Super Bowl. Yes, it will. That a lot more teams are gonna go heavy man against the Niners now. They saw what worked against the Niners. Teams are gonna go heavy man against the Niners. John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan know this. They know this. They saw it in the Super Bowl. They saw it against the Ravens. They saw it against we're getting a phone call. Decline. Sorry.
But no, you're right. You saw it in the Super Bowl. What was the choice for the Kansas City Chiefs? And again, the Chiefs had really good cornerbacks, but teams that are going to be in the Super Bowl are going to have the right personnel. You're going to be able to match man coverage, and that's what essentially made Deebo Samuel a little more limited in that game. The route running maybe wasn't as crisp. Trent McDuffie was locking him up, and so made it a little tougher to beat man coverage. What does Brandon Aiyuk do? He's a guy who beats man coverage.
Turn the game back on, and you'll see he couldn't beat man coverage. Just turn it back on.
No, but it's fine. If that's what you believe, that's what you believe. But when you look at statistics and when you look at game film, the number one thing that Brandon Aiyuk does is excel against man coverage. That's why a lot of teams try and run zone against the 49ers, at least when they don't have the capabilities to match with man coverage. And that's where the 49ers see these intricacies of their offense kind of fold out. You see the in-breaking routes over the intermediate area. You see all the different parts of their offense that are able to, kind of flourish. But then when it comes to man coverage, you have a one-on-one man beater on the outside of Brandon Aiyuk. That's why his explosive play rate was so high. That's why you see the efficiency numbers when you talk about things like that, ranking only second to a guy like Tyreek Hill. There's a reason Aiyuk was seen in that consideration this past year in the Pro Bowl All-Pro consideration because he was up there in those type of metrics due to his ability against man coverage.
Yeah, and that's the thing is with the Niners, with the biggest issue on why they lost is when you're looking at what happened is they decided to run a lot of man beaters for Deebo. Deebo was the primary read. Wasn't creating separation. Brock was going to that one. Kyle was calling it. So essentially, you're looking at it, and it's not. I wouldn't say it's Kyle Brock Purdy's fault because Kyle was calling it, but it's like at the end of the day, this is their fault. Why am I getting so many phone calls?
Be popular.
Like, yeah, I'm over here getting phone calls. I never get phone calls throughout the day, and I'm getting heck of phone calls. But looking at it, like you got to have a guy who could beat man. Like you have to, and it has to be one guy. And if you don't have that, you're going to struggle in the NFL. And that's why a lot of teams are struggling in the NFL because they don't have that guy who could beat man coverage. Now the 49ers, they have a lot to go into the draft. I hope they do draft offensive line, especially in a deep offensive line draft class. You could get when I keep seeing a lot of people say you can't get a starter along the O-line at 31. I highly disagree because there's going to be a lot of guys who go in the second, third, and potentially in the fourth round who are going to be starters year 1, year 2 of the draft. Like that's something the Niners got to look forward to. Okay, cool. If you think Colton McKivitz and you think Feliciano can hold it down this year, I'm down. And you definitely got to look forward to drafting for the future. And even if it's not now, I could name like 5 dudes, and I'm sure Rohan could too, who could beat out Feliciano and McKivitz at 31 if they're available. I know for me, when I'm looking at the draft, it's not necessarily looking for this year. If Kyle and John truly believe, like I was saying, if they truly believe that the O-line is set this year, let's move forward and then start drafting for the future. So for me, what do you think the Niners do for draft-wise, Rohan?
I think right now, at least their free agency moves position them well to take best player available, which in my opinion likely ends up being a tackle at 31, or it could be a trade up, maybe even a trade down. I think that overall the 49ers are in a good spot for them to address, the offensive line at 31. Why? When you look at the positions the Niners were initially, thinking about, you talk about defensive end. The Niners just got a number of 2-year deals at defensive end to complement their current rotation. It seems like they're set there where they don't have to reach for a defensive end maybe in the first round. You talk about cornerback. I just don't know whether the cornerback board is going to fall well enough to where the Niners are going to be able to get a cornerback they believe is a first round caliber player at 31. But also, they signed a guy in Isaac Yanum to where if you don't feel cornerback is the best fit, you don't have to go for cornerback at 31. You look at defensive tackle. Defensive tackle, again, they brought in multiple players to where you might not have to reach for a defensive tackle at 31. So the one thing I will say about the Niners free agency strategy, I think it positions them well for the draft to where they can draft best player available. Ultimately, I believe they're going to go for an offensive tackle at 31. I think that that is the best move. And when it comes to me believing, are they going to be the week one starter? I don't know, just because of the intricacies of the offense. I think that that's one thing, but also with the 49ers philosophy with offensive linemen where they trust continuity, they trust things like that. I don't know if they're going to be a week one starter. Could they be a week one starter? Yes. Could they also start, at some point during the season? Yes. But I think you're going to also look for a future outlook at offensive line. I think that that's going to be the case to me, and that's where I feel like the 49ers might ultimately go. Round two, round three, I think that that's where it becomes intriguing. There are a good amount of cornerbacks, a good amount of receivers, a good amount of defensive linemen that I think are going to fit in this mold. I think offensive line, it does sour off after the first 2 rounds, so I think that that's where you look to target that position, and then you can kind of gauge the field after that. But I want you to talk to me. We got a super chat, so talk to me about my guy Malachi Corley. A lot of people comparing him to Deebo. What do you think about him?
Man, you could definitely see that comparison. I mean, when you watch Malachi Corley, he has the speed, he has the yards after the catch ability. The only issue he doesn't really have is the route running. Um, for me, when I watched Malachi Corley, I didn't really I liked what I saw from the Senior Bowl, but I wouldn't say like, oh, he's for sure. I like you don't compare players to guys like Deebo because of the yak ability. Now, I think the yak ability is phenomenal, but for me, it's route running. Like that's where Deebo struggles, and that's where Corley struggles, and I think that's the biggest issue because he's that gadget guy. Now he has more ability to run routes than Deebo, that's for sure. He has the ability to sink his hips, and I think he's going to keep working at that. I really like Malachi Corley, but and I know Invader 49er asked me to name a couple of guys that could start over John Feliciano, Colt McKivitz, Kingsley, Jordan Morgan, Graham, Zach Frazier. We could even go down to guys like Christian Haynes immediately start over. Cooper Beebe immediately will start over at right guard. Um, who else am I missing off the top of my head? Who
You're
else am I
talking about the guys on the interior. My guy Jackson Powers. Well, he won't be there, but Jackson
He
Powers
won't be there,
Johnson.
but and likely I'm not huge on Tyler Guyton. I know you named I know uh Invader 49er named he named uh let me go up. The
Jordan
Guyton. I'm
Morgan.
not high on Guyton.
Oh,
Not high
okay.
on Guyton at all. So for me, it's one of those ones there's people look at the Niners right guard and right tackle situation, and just because Kyle and John are telling you that they're great, trust me, they're not that good. And go talk to
Yeah.
other teams and other scouts and everyone, and you'll see right away they're not good. Like Kyle and John don't even think they're that good. And if Kyle and John thought they were that good, they would have extended Colton McKivitz on a longer contract. If they thought John Feliciano was legit, they would have brought him in on a longer contract. He's only 32 years. Guards could play to 35. So if they truly thought that they were that good, hey, like Brandon Aiyuk says, right? Money talks, bullshit walks. Like if you're truly put your money where your mouth is, if the Niners were serious that they thought those two guys were those guys, they would have paid Feliciano for more than 1 year on a $2 million contract. They would have paid. If you look at the contract that they gave Colt McKivitz, it's not a starting caliber contract. So
Uh-huh.
truly, like going off of what Deebo says, hey, money talks, bullshit walks, right? So obviously they didn't show that they truly love those guys. So
Yeah. Ultimately, to me, I do believe the Niners, their starting five right now is going to be their starting five. Um, day one. Do I think
Because they
that could
only
be?
had I'm sorry, Rohan. It's because this is the
Go
only time they've had a top 10 pick on an offensive line. Like, what other player have they drafted in the top 10 that was
ahead.
offensive line? Like, even
No.
if you take someone if they take someone back in the second round, their plan was to start Aaron Banks year one. If it wasn't for his shoulder injury, they started Spencer Burford year one. He was a fourth round pick. So, like, I don't get what you're saying, because they've literally shown they're willing to start rookies year one.
If I'm not
They
mistaken, I believe Mike McGlinchey is also the only first-round pick offensive lineman that the Niners have taken. I believe,
Yeah, I feel
at
like
least
the only
in
one.
the Shanahan regime, he's
No,
the
yeah, only one
only
in the Shanahan
first-round.
regime,
Yeah, because they've
and they
gone.
decided not to pay him because they missed. So
Mhm,
what are we
yeah,
doing here? Banks was planning on starting. He didn't start. Kyle Shanahan came out and said Banks was playing so well in camp and in preseason. If it wasn't for the shoulder injury, he likely starts. They then started Burford year one. He was rotating with Brunskill. He was starting year one. So people look at the 49ers and like, oh, they won't play rookies. They play rookies along the O-line. They've done it before. They did it with their plan was with Banks. They did it with Burford. McGlinchey, I
yeah.
don't count McGlinchey. Any top 10 pick is playing right away. Like, that doesn't make sense. A top 10, any position is playing year one. So that doesn't make sense when people bring up McGlinchey.
Talking about this comment, I actually tend to generally agree in terms of starting tackle day one. The one question or the one difference I think with this class is this is a very unique offensive tackle class. I think this is a very unique offensive tackle class in the sense that you might have 11 first round caliber guys. Usually people reach, for offensive line. This is a class where in the first round, you're not going to have to reach for an offensive tackle because of the amount of talent that there is in the class at the position.
I mean, when I see stuff like this, like, oh, you need a top 15 pick, I disagree with. Jordan Mailata from the Eagles, starting caliber right tackle, super. I think he made the Pro Bowl or maybe All Pro. 6'6" dude. He's one of the better tackles in the NFL. He got paid like it. Was drafted in the 7th round. Like, if you could scout, you could scout. If you could find offensive lineman, you could find offensive lineman. You don't have to find dudes. And you're looking at dudes to be all pros. The Niners don't need an all pro at right guard or right tackle. They just need starting level players. Banks or Feliciano and McKivitz aren't that, but that's where we're going to leave it off because I know we both got to get going, Rohan. Shout out to everyone for tuning in. Appreciate the love in the comments, going back and forth. Invader, 49er Faithful, Brother Bob, 49ers Throwback was in the
Brother
chat today.
Bob. That's my guy.
49ers for Life was here. Shout out you guys, man. Really appreciate it. No Border Sports as well. Shout out to you guys. Thank you for the love. That's it for today's show. Rohan, do you have anything going on later this week or later today?
We'll figure it out. Not later today. Probably, if I have a show, it might be on Friday. We'll figure something out though. Hopefully, get another live stream or two this week. Appreciate though everybody for tuning in. I haven't done one in 2 weeks, so appreciate everybody. Thank you guys so much, and we'll figure something out soon.
Alrighty, I'll see you guys later tonight. I'll be on with Rob Stats from I believe Gold Nation, right?
Yeah, Gold
I
Standard Podcast Network. Yeah.
yeah, I always forget. His name reminds me too much of the Niner Nation because it's where he came from. So it's like, but Gold Nation, man. Shout out to Rob Stats.